Dear listeners, like there's something about the stories that we inherit that never quite leaves us. They sit quietly in the back of our minds. These fragments of folklore and family legend waiting for the right moment to resurface. Like something. They come back as half remembered phrases our grandparents used to say. Like so sometimes they arrive in dreams we cannot quite explain. And sometimes, if they were paying attention, they reshape entirely like how we see ourselves and the world we thought we knew. So today we are sitting with someone who decided to dig into those old roots and see what grew. So welcome back to another powerful episode of Mind Meets Machine. I'm your host Avik, and this is the podcast where we slow down long enough to notice the patterns that shape how we think, feel, and shape and make sense of being human. And today we have a very lovely guest. Please welcome Torry Rose. So welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Amazing, amazing. So Tori, like before we get into the discussion, I'll quickly love to introduce you with all the listeners. So dear listeners, Tori is an indie author whose debut novel weaves fantasy and mystery through the threads of ancestral folklore, creating stories that feel both timeless and deeply personal. So I won't take much of your time. Let's get started. So really, a lot of people think that folklore and mythology are just the old stories that we tell for the entertainment, relics of a simpler time. But you have built an entire novel around the idea that these stories carry something more, something that still matters. So what do you think we misunderstand about the role these ancestral tales play in our lives today?
Well, what I have found, Avik, is that before there was TV and radio, our ancestors used to communicate around a campfire or, strolling minstrels, depends on where they are, and they tell their stories. That's how they communicated with each other. That's how stories were told before this busy world of, watching TV and letting people tell us who we are. The commercials were bombarded with all this information. And what I notice is that if we go back, if we, our childhood, just in conversation, it doesn't, for me, I forgot that the stories my parents told me really resonate. It shaped me. And speaking to other people around the world, other cultures, not only do they shape that culture, but it also showed me how interconnected we are if we told our own stories, not allow media to tell us who we are. And I feel, and I deeply know this for myself, is that when we go about telling our own stories, it's much more powerful than giving it to someone else to tell
Right.
our story. And that's another reason I decided to be an indie author, because you try to fit yourself into all these different genres and everything's trying to shape you instead of us as people shaping the world. And so it's powerful. And if we go back to that, and I see people doing that, just in minor conversations, you could be riding a train or speaking to someone at work and they do something, maybe they throw salt over their shoulder or something, and you say, oh, my mother used to do that. Or something's very similar, like leave the windows open or close the blinds, so the electricity won't come through. It's powerful stuff.
So, like when you started pulling from your ancestral folklore, was there a kind of moment like where a story you did always known suddenly revealed something new, like something you hadn't seen before?
Very interesting question. Yes, in two ways. When I had my children, that's when those stories really started to flood back to me. And many, many times when you have children or if you are around young people and they want to know about you. My mother had passed on by the time I had my children. And so they always wanted to know what was grandma like. So instead of just so when I told them about her, I used to tell them about her stories and how she would take us on nature walks to slow us down as children. And she'd take us into the woods and she'd talk about her past and what her parents told her. And I realized at that moment when I was telling my children about how my my mother took us on nature walks, that she was actually telling me her origin story of her people.
Okay.
Because she would say, we would be in the woods and she goes, she says, my people believe that we were born, came up through a mound in the earth, and that's how we were born. And we came out, and when we came out, we dried in the sun, and then and that's how people came to earth, and how powerful it was to connect, always stay connected to nature, because nature would teach us what to eat, what not to eat. She would take us on these walks, and as I'm telling this to my children, something came to mind. I had the TV on one night, just folding clothes, and I was on the History Channel. And this was powerful to me. And this is why I decided to write this down. They were talking about what if the history we are told about the human race, we're looking for the Big Bang and all these things, that it came about another way. And they happened to be talking about the Choctaw, which was my mother's people. And there is an actual mound in Mississippi
Okay.
that they believe this is where they came from. And then from my African side, my mother used to tell us, she at night, she'd take us not only on daytime walks, she'd take us on nighttime
Hmm.
walks, and she pointed to the sky and she said, you see those 7 stars? She goes, that's where we
Okay.
came from. And this is how it just all came back to me. And then I started watching TV, the History Channels, Ancient Aliens. And I'm thinking, oh my God, these are the stories my mother told me.
That's interesting. I mean, I'm remembering about my childhood, like when I also used to hear this, that, okay, like, I mean, mostly used to happen during the summertime. Like, but I mean, so basically what happens is like at night after you had your dinner, we used to go at the rooftop. So it's like it's open and there are a lot of breeze going on. So you sit and you show that, okay, see, this is the star and all those ones, right? So I was just trying to connect that part. So it is, I mean, it's really great. Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much for making me remember all those childhood moments. But I mean, it's really interesting because how stories can hide in the plain sight, right? That way, and we hear them so many times, they become the kind of background noise, and then one day the meaning shifts, and we realize that they were never about what we thought were about. So yeah, and
And
so
just that
yeah,
what you just shared, this
yeah.
is what I mean. When I talk to different cultures, we all
Mm.
have a similar story. Here we are around the
Exactly.
world, and we all have a similar story.
Exactly, exactly. So you describe your work as digging up the old roots, and the phrases they suggest something beneath the surface, like something that takes effort to uncover. Right. So when you think about why these stories get kind of forgotten in the first place, then what do you see as the deeper pattern there? Like, what makes us lose those touch with these narratives that once held so much meaning?
I tried to show it in the story when I wrote in a wider way, and I'll try to answer this as simply as I can.
Okay.
As the world got bigger and we started interconnecting, I found that even though we were similar, all cultures are similar. Our myths are, there's the cosmic egg, right? Every mythology has that and all these things. I personally feel, and my mother used to say this, and I say it in the story, when you don't know your history, when your history is taken from you, and someone tells you, no, this is your history, what you remember is not true. It kind of you kind of lose part of yourself, and when you lose part of yourself, you lose your power. And this is what the story is about, and digging up old roots to know who you really are. That's the magic, because once you are free and you know who you are, and no one can tell you who you are. And I'll say this, and I hope the listeners get this. My mother used to say, you are a child of the universe first, who happen to be on a planet as this, you all these labels you get yourself. But more importantly, you're a child of the universe. So when that's taken from you culturally, from around the world, indigenous cultures around the world, when they are taken over by bigger forces, then you lose your power, and it shrinks you if you lose your history. And that's why it's important to remember those ancestral tales. Because for me, and I think for many cultures around the world, and care where you come from, that's your truth. And when you have your truth, there's your power. In my story, I show the Fairland family, who rediscover that on their land is not only the connection with nature, where a long time ago, a lot of cultures believe they can communicate. And now more and more people realize, yes, trees are sentient. They are interconnected. And underneath is the real world, is the real power if you slow down to listen. And it's buried because if only a handful of people are telling you, going back to what I was saying about TV, if they're telling you who you are, you're losing who you are yourself,
Okay.
and you're gone. Yeah. So you have to dig it up, you know, be it, some people say, when I went to therapy or I had to go talk to someone, the more I uncovered things, I felt more powerful. And that's the magic,
Correct.
knowing who you are. And that's why it's important for us to hold on to our roots. It's easy. People think if you hold on to your individuality, your roots, and where you come from, that means you're not assimilating somehow. But it really is like a soup. It makes us all more powerful as a people. So the smaller, and in my story, I show there's only a handful of 8 families that created this massive network of hiding who we really were because they wanted the power, because they forgot who they were. And they were taking it from all other cultures, thinking, okay, how do you do that? I do know there's a story when the
Correct.
indigenous people in America were being forced to be on reservations. I know everyone has told about the Trails of Tears and Bill March from Mississippi, my parents' hometown, to Oklahoma, where my father's people and back again. They were not allowed to do their ghost dances because people were afraid. Like, what are they doing? It's so different. They were more powerful. They were getting their energy up just to keep themselves going. The African people coming over on slave ships, you remove their who they are and where they came from. It makes you small. But once you found your voice, and I found writing this book and expanding on my mother's theories or stories, I felt more powerful as a person. It really did. And so the whole story, that's why it's the mystery, because for a long time, the family, it's a family saga. They felt like they needed to be quiet. Even they felt they needed to be quiet for fear of being harmed, because that's the way it used to be.
I definitely want to also ask you about like creating something that draws on the ancestral memory can be deeply meaningful, but it's also vulnerable work, right? There are probably moments when doubt creeps in, when you wonder that if you are getting it right or if anyone will care. So how do you handle those setbacks and at the same time, like what keeps you returning to this work even when it feels hard or kind of uncertain?
Sure. And I have to tell you, many a nights I think, why am I doing this? Okay. Originally, when I started writing it, my son, unlike my daughter, didn't want me to read from a book. He wanted me to tell him a story. So that's how it built. He actually named this book Secret of the
Okay.
Family Tree.
Wow.
He did, because he says, wow, mom, this is because I tell him something. He'd go to the playground and he says, my mother said, blah, blah, blah. He goes, it's a secret. And I say, oh, because yeah, he goes, yeah, but they like that story. They like that. Tell me more. So I'd hear his voice every time I wanted to put it aside, and I'm thinking people are going to and then my family, I have family, they says, no, originally I was writing it for myself, no one to read, no one to I'm just writing it down, my family's stories. I didn't want it to get lost, so I kept writing it. So that's what kept me going. And then when I wrote it, someone says, you should put it out there, other people will like it. And I said, well, I'll do it as a fantasy, a children's novel. But I was finding more adults liked the story, even though it's told through a 12 and 11-year-old eyes. It really is a family saga because their parents and their ancestors were all feeding into that pot. So that's what keeps me going. Even now, people will say, "What do you?" I'm thinking it's a story. I love it, so I write it mostly for me. And if someone cares to share the journey with me, great. And that's how it keeps me going. And doubt, yes, because I'm thinking, oh, I have to get this right. I have to get this right. And I'm thinking, how can it be wrong? It's my story. Going back to people telling you, even within your own culture, I'm not sure if that's correct. Well, that's the story my mom told me. And what I said to them, what did your mom tell you? Oh, yeah, it's similar. What's kind of similar? I went to Ireland, and my mother used to talk about the little people when they dance. The indigenous people either will look down. I says, why are they looking down, mom? She says, because they don't want to, they're dancing with the little people. And when I went to Ireland in the 80s and I, learned about the myth of of course, the elfin folk and leprechauns, and it's in my book. Every culture has a little person, a woodland, the knockers, it's there. And I find that's what people connect to. And that's what gives me the story was only supposed to be a one and done, but it is a trilogy. And it's a blast writing it.
So, if you have to give one advice to the listeners today, what will you give?
To tell their story. It's important, especially in today's world, that we share our stories. People talk at each other, and if we say, "Hey, I do this a lot." I says, "Where'd that come from? Where'd you get that sweater?" This, I remember that pattern. The conversation is so fluid. It's a questioning instead of saying again, going back to letting people tell you this is who you are. Say, "Hey, this is what I used to do." Even cooking, if you're cooking, with other people, potlucks, hey, my mother used to make this with this. Oh, my mother used to make this with that. And then you start on the story. I remember when we made this, and she would, we all add something to the pot, and it's great. And so my advice or a message I would love for listeners to hear is that tell your story, even if you don't write it down. Don't get discouraged. If you want an agent, get an agent. You don't want an agent, write it down. There's so many avenues now where you can just put your story out there. If you don't want to write, you want to be a storyteller, create this podcast and just keep telling a story every day, adding on to it. If you're not one to want to write a book, create a podcast about story or just you. I personally feel that brings the world together in the most beautiful way, and is taking back our magic. People say, I feel more powerful. Not only is it taking it back our power, but it's bringing back magic. Creativity is magic, and we are born creative people. Instead of just sitting in a
Exactly.
cubicle and doing something, we are creative people. And if we don't do this, it's almost like for me, it's like I'm suffocating. I get up in the middle of the night and I'm writing, because of thought. I have so many little stories. So if anything, write, tell the story, dance it. If you're a dancer, Aboriginals in Australia, they dance their story.
Right.
It's beautiful.
Amazing. Amazing. So, and if listeners wants to connect with you, how they can connect?
They can go to my website, Torry Rose, TOROYROSE.com. Of course, that's http:/// in the beginning. Go there. You can sign up for my newsletter. My second book, To Secret of the Family Tree, is coming out this fall. It's called The Many Branches, where the story continues for the Fairland family. And hopefully, when they read and reach out, and I also will be doing some newsletters soon, talking about more about, I want to invite people to come onto a blog and tell their stories. So that's my
Amazing.
next step. Yeah.
Amazing. So, dear listeners, what I'll do is I'll put all the links, details, everything into the show notes for easy reference so that you can easily reach out to Tori. And I'll just say the stories we inherit are not just the entertainment, they are the maps, mirrors, and sometimes the only proof that we have that what we are feeling has been filled for. So, Tori, thank you so much for being here, for sharing your perspectives. And I'll just say that, dear listeners, like you just need to be willing to dig a little, to sit with it that you find, and also to let those old roots to be willing to kind of teach you something new about who you are, right? So I'll just say thank you so much for listening to Mind Meets Machine. I'm your host, Avik, and take care of yourselves and each other. We'll see you soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye bye.